In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
What happens when you leave a thriving medical practice? Not because you're burned out, but because your definition of success changes. Rishma Walji, our guest this week on Money Tales, spent 2 decades as a doctor where she helped others navigate emotionally complex decisions about life, hormones, and healthcare. But when her own crossroads arrived, Rishma made a bold pivot, choosing family, personal growth, and intentional living over her credentials and paycheck. Rishma shares the emotional calculus behind pivoting away from the work she trained so long for, how she reconciled ambition with motherhood, and why her definition of success had to expand beyond income. Let me tell you more about Rishma. After 20 years in clinical practice as a naturopathic doctor, she's currently writing a book about intentional decision-making. Much of Rishma's work is related to awareness and emotion that can either guide or mislead our life choices. She is the host of the EXO Conversations podcast and a TEDx speaker.
Here are 3 key money topics Rishma hits on in this conversation. First, money talks come easy at home but get complicated with relatives. Rishma navigates her immediate family's financial discussions smoothly, yet finds it harder when extended family enters the picture. Cultural expectations, unspoken judgments, and the delicate dance of family harmony create invisible barriers to open financial dialogue. Second, every big decision has 3 hidden layers: raw emotions, necessary sacrifices, and the sneaky patterns that unconsciously guide us. Navigate these, and you'll make better choices. And third, without a clear vision of what you want, who you want to be, and how you want to feel, you'll end up chasing a dream that isn't yours. Now it's our pleasure to bring you Rishma Walji's Money Tales.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager.
Sandy, I was at lunch with a friend of mine yesterday, someone who's had a great career, really successful, but decided it was time to step out of a full-time career. And so she just started retirement.
How exciting. That's a big transition.
She's having a blast, planning a bunch of travel. This is a pretty natural conversation to start talking about money. And we did because now she doesn't have a current income. And what we talked about was how your relationship with money changes when you go from earning a paycheck to not having to live off of what you have earned and saved. I've never really thought about how that relationship changes.
It does. I've worked with many, many clients over the years who've gone through that transition. It's a really big one. Not only is the source of spending money changing, but identity is often changing. Schedules are changing. It's a really, really big, major transition. And so there's a lot to think about and prepare for, money and lifestyle-wise, and individual mental health-wise as well.
Well, I laughed because you're now in a position where you can spend more because you have the time. That's ironic. She did a great job setting herself up, working with a financial planner, understanding her spending, what her projections are, being really realistic. It's a great reminder that when you have more time, you can spend more.
You can. And I think it's really important to do that long-term planning that she's done. So congratulations to your friend. but also budgets, which sometimes called the B word, become very helpful when you're retired. They help you just stay within the guidelines of your plan. And this is where the preparation for a change in lifestyle is really helpful. Thinking in advance about how you're going to spend your time when you're no longer working day to day is also really important, because sometimes that does mean spending more money. In my experience, clients love to travel during that time period. It makes sense because at that point, you're the youngest and most energetic thing you're going to be for the rest of your life. So why not use your funds to explore the world? But it all comes down to that proper planning to make sure that you don't run out of money, because the worst thing that can happen is having to go back to work after decades of not having worked and finding yourself in a really different situation.
If you don't want to, that's right. She talked about the B word budget, and she's on it, and it gives her really nice peace of mind.
I was sort of kidding because people hate budgeting, but budgets are friends. Embrace the budget. Hug the budget.
Hug the budget. All right. Let's turn our conversation to our guest today, Rishma Walji. It's wonderful to be talking with you on Money Tales today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Rishma, would you kick us off by introducing yourself and share a couple pivotal moments that have taken place in your life that really influenced the person you are today?
My background is in healthcare. I spent a couple decades in clinical practice as a naturopathic doctor. I think in the US, you might know more functional medicine in that world. So I spent many years helping patients make very complex emotional decisions about life and hormones and healthcare. I have an academic background too, but also I like to say I have all the sciencey stuff, but I'm human. I'm a mom and I'm a wife and I'm a person with my own ambitions and things like that. And so when we think about pivotal moments, I mean, of course, my career definitely is one. And the conversation you just had about leaving your career is definitely one that resonates with me because I have made a big pivot. I grew up in a big extended family. My mom is one of 10 siblings and my dad is one of 8. And so they have many siblings, lots of cousins, and we're very close to all of them.
Do you know all their names? What about birthdays?
Names, birthdays. I know all the kids. I know all the spouses. I know all the grandkids. It's a very big cultural thing where we're very close to the family. And it's wonderful to have this many people to love. But it's also really hard because you also realize that there is a lot more people to lose. And so when I was very young, we lost a lot of people in our lives. My grandparents lived with us until I was a teenager. They both passed away. I think I learned really early on the value of family and that life is not to be taken for granted and what are the things that are really important in life. So I think that shaped me quite a lot. I think the other thing that's really shaped me is being a woman in a South Asian culture. I feel like there's a lot of traditions and gender roles and things like that that I grew up with that being first generation Canadian, I maybe didn't totally agree with, but really shaped me in terms of how I see the world. And now I think a lot of my different things that I do in life, whether it's my career or even just how I raise my daughters, really stems from that fact of wanting to be an advocate for women and women's health and women understanding their bodies and their options in life. Those are the main takeaways from my life.
I really appreciate you digging into your youth, being a woman in this culture, but also in Canada. What were you learning specifically around money?
My parents had a really tough change of life when they were developing their financial stability. They're from Africa, originally India, but for a few generations lived in East Africa. And there was a lot of political stuff happening over there. So what happened was they had established themselves, they got married, and then they left actually on their honeymoon. A whole bunch of political stuff happened. And my dad's brother called and said, don't come back. And essentially they lost everything, their home, their business, their credentials. They had just what they had in their suitcase. They had to live illegally for a while. They moved around. They ended up living with my dad's sister for a while. And eventually, after a number of years, ended up moving to Canada. And so their money story is very much based on what can be taken away from you. So the thing that I remember from childhood is my parents always used to say, anything can be taken away from you, but not your education. So they were very, very strong in trying to get me into having a good, secure education. And so that was something that really stuck with me, that feeling of money can always be coming and going, and you never really have control over it in the sense of It can be taken away at any moment, and life can be taken away at any moment. These are very interesting themes that came up for me. So growing up, they didn't have a lot of money. They came to Canada with what was on their backs and $20 in their pocket. My dad worked 3 jobs. My mom worked during the day, went to school at night. So it was a very different upbringing than my kids are having now.
Rishma, tell us about how you were impacted by those messages and also the modeling of seeing your parents working all the time. You said your grandparents were living with you. How did this manifest in you as you were growing up?
I think there was some really good money stories that came out of it and some maybe ones that I've been working on changing. The good one is I've realized, I think somehow, despite the fact that my parents worked so hard, despite the fact that they really had nothing to their name and had to really establish themselves, my dad was an accountant. So he had a very sound understanding of money, which was really good. And the one thing I think somehow I interpreted was that money can come and go. If you work hard and you figure yourself out and you put your all into it, the money will come somehow. You can always make it work. You can lose everything and start all over again. So that was something that really, I think, was beneficial to me because I never was scared to try something new. I never was scared to go into a career that was maybe less well known or into a field that was maybe less well known. I feel like I had that emotional security around money that if I put my all into it, if I'm educated, if I try, the money will come. I think where I had a harder time was the work-life balance. That's where I really struggled, I think, because especially the way that healthcare is set up here in Canada and the way that I was in not a public healthcare system, I was never salaried. I was always fee for service. I had trouble taking a vacation because now I'm not getting paid. Not only am I not getting paid, I'm paying my clinic, my staff, my rent in order to take this vacation. I had to learn how to balance lifestyle with that need for making more money because every time I took some time off, it felt like, oh, well, that's money I'm not earning.
Meaning that when you were away, were you thinking about money?
Yes. I was calculating, oh, this vacation costs me this much. And then I add my rent. And then I add how much income I'm not making when I'm not seeing this many patients. It's a different sort of way of thinking about vacation. To me, it cost a lot more money to go on vacation than for someone else who maybe was on a salary position, like my husband.
I think it's fascinating. You have these polar opposite feelings of, given your upbringing with the story you just told, you could have clung to money, but you didn't. You believed it will come. However, then you were worried about the expenses in life. How did you work through that? That's a hard thing. It makes sense. You're going away. It's cost more than just the trip. How'd you resolve that?
It's taken me a long time. Thinking back, I don't know if it was from scarcity necessarily. I think I was just really ambitious and very independent. And again, being a woman in a South Asian culture, I wanted to take care of myself. I wanted to make sure that I was independent. I didn't rely on anyone. So I think it came from this need for establishing myself in my career. I also really loved my work. I loved my job. I was very passionate about it. And so I had all these big career ambitions. So I think there was this piece of, I also have to learn to take care of myself. And we go through these life stages. This is why now I'm so fascinated in the area of decision making and why I do all this work now in intentional decision making, because decisions are really messy. We think they should be logical and very clean, and they're not. There's emotion involved, there's sacrifice and trade involved, there's money patterns being one of them, but there's also this identity piece. And so I really had to work through transition in life to say, okay, right now I'm in this stage of my life where I'm establishing myself, my career, but also my patient base, also my income. And then I had to sort of work through, oh, now I'm having kids and I want to take some time off and be with my kids. And now I'm not going to be earning.
Oh, that would be really expensive.
It's very expensive. Pay for the kids and also not work as much. I was working evenings and weekends. I'm no longer doing that. There's a whole shift in dynamic of how much I'm able to work, how much I want to stay at home. So that was a really big shift for me. And I think it really came down to me recognizing that there are other things in my life that are important to me, not just money. And that was really hard. If I'm honest, it took me a really, really long time. And there are moments still I have to redefine, is this still success? Even though I know that my financial position now, after this many years, is much different than it was then, there are things that we have in our brain. You think that everything should be defined by how much you make and how much you earn and all of these things. And I really had to sort of untangle those emotions around lifestyle and money and what was important to me at what stage. And as I move into the years of perimenopause and menopause and all the things I used to talk to my patients about, there's no choice. You have to take care of yourself. You have to start valuing your personal health, your emotional health. And this is a luxury that my parents never really had. They didn't have that option to take that time off. So it's something I feel really privileged to be able to do.
I want to go back to the gender stereotypes that you were mentioning before. Can you bring that to life a little more and tell us more specifically how that fed into this anchor around money? I need to make it. I need to take care of myself.
I think culture is very different in different places. So I don't want to generalize, but what I learned was women have a certain role, men have a certain role. Men are the breadwinners, women take care of the home and do the cooking and all the family stuff. A very traditional environment. And there's a strength to that. There is definitely a strength to each person's role. But in a Canadian society, or at least when I was growing up in Canada, I was not okay with that. I didn't want to be the one who was going to be at home taking care of the family, going to be at home taking care of the kids. I mean, I was fine to do it, but I didn't want that to be my identity. And thankfully, my mom did work. And so she did share that she had this professional identity outside of the home. How it unfolded for me, I think, was just to be able to say, I want to have a voice of my own, and I want to be able to determine how that unfolds for me. And does that mean I do some gender rolled chores at home? Of course I do. But so does my husband. And we also interchange. He's happy to do the dishes and cook and all of these things. But we had to sort of navigate that in our marriage and also in money, because there was a time when my kids were young and I wanted to be at home. And then that meant that I wasn't going to be making the same kind of money. And then I thought, okay, am I turning into a housewife? Like, what is happening? And there's absolutely strength in that and privilege in being able to be at home with my kids. And I wanted to honor that. But I also had all this ambition. So there's a lot to navigate there.
We started with talking about your relationship with money, and I mentioned my friend. The minute you talked about wanting to be home and not having an income, or maybe you had a smaller income, I'm not sure. I'm just curious how you navigated that. And how were conversations with your husband? If you don't have money that you're bringing in, how did your relationship with money change?
We have lots of conversations, my husband and I, so much so that people ask this all the time. When you think about intentional decision making, there are times when I get really caught up in, I want to be independent. I don't want to depend on anyone else. It was interesting that in that period of time when my kids were really little, my husband's concern was, I don't want to be a bad dad, because he was traveling a lot for work. And so we were sort of forced into these roles a little bit. I was breastfeeding, I was at home with my kids, whatever that was. And he was traveling for work. And we were sort of forced into these gender roles. But then as the kids got older, we also sort of merged and realized, okay, now I want to be more a career person and he wants to be more involved with the kids. So we had very many difficult conversations about money, about roles, about family. Thankfully, we're both on the same page about money in terms of functioning as a team and recognizing that we have a vision for our family. We don't necessarily have a vision just for ourselves. So we have our own visions, but they stay within the family vision. So we try to support each other. So thankfully, that's been really good. But for sure, there are moments where both of us have these thoughts of, I'm not bringing in as much money as I want to. And then we just get creative. For me, I ended up finding other ways to make money. I have other revenue streams, other businesses that don't require me to be there. I've learned a lot about finances. My parents taught me a lot because of accounting, but they didn't understand investments in the way that I understand investments, because they were dealing with a mortgage that had double-digit interest rates. They were trying to pay off their mortgage as quickly as possible, where in our lifetime, after we bought a house, we didn't have those same pressures. We had different pressures. So I learned a lot. I was also in a different place starting out than when my parents were starting out. So this generational change, we always have to update our beliefs about money. We always have to update our thoughts. And I often get caught in this thinking that was theirs. And then I have to remind myself, is that their thinking or is it my thinking? And same with the kids. My kids are in a very different privileged place than I was or than my parents were. How do I teach my kids the value of a dollar, but also let them know that they're in a place where they can maybe go out and do more in the world and do good in the world that I maybe wasn't able to do or that my parents weren't able to do. So it's a lot of navigating.
How are you doing that, Rishma?
We have a lot of open conversations with all of us. Being in healthcare and talking about women's hormones all the time, I talk about taboo topics a lot. And my kids get frustrated sometimes. I'm very open about puberty and sex and hormones and all of these things. And so you add money as a taboo topic. For them, it's just normal. We just talk about this stuff all the time. And I think that's the biggest thing is we talk about it, we share our concerns. They know exactly what's happening with us. And we ask them questions, they ask us questions. I mean, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but that's how we're doing it.
It sounds very successful from this end. And I wonder how that ecosystem that you've developed in your immediate family translates to your broader family where there's so many people. How does money come into play in that broader extended family relationship?
I don't think those conversations are as open. I think it's cultural, and I think there's expectations and there's judgments. It's a tough one. In the broader family, not everyone went down the same paths. Not everyone has the same kind of relationship that I have. Not everyone is happy with their careers. These are things that I think bring up a lot of tension. I would like to think I'm open to it if someone wants to have the conversation, but I would say I am definitely more open with my immediate family than I am with my extended family.
We just know from work with clients, in addition to our own families, those family dynamics can be really hard to cut through. When we have those relationships within our family and we evolve, and of course, the other family members are evolving, it's hard sometimes for us to come together as our evolved selves. And we kind of tend to backtrack into how we behaved as children.
I was taught, make sure everyone's happy, make sure everyone is feeling good about themselves. And so sometimes I will downplay things or I will be a little bit more, we just went away on vacation. It was not a big deal when really it was like a big vacation because we like to travel and we like to travel with the kids and we're very into experiences over gifts and things like that. But I will downplay things. And my husband would be like, why didn't you tell them where we went? And I'm like, oh, I didn't want them to feel bad. And maybe that's cultural. I'm not sure.
Do you want them not to feel badly, or are you thinking about the judgment that would be placed on you?
Probably depends on who it is.
You said that it's a very different upbringing that your girls are having than what you went through. It reminds me of conversations we have at home. Our kids are having a much different upbringing than we did, in particular, my husband, and it's hard. How do you navigate that? Describe your conversations with your husband about that.
I think we are trying to instill the idea that we want them to think of the world as a bigger place than just them.
It's so hard. What do you do there?
It's so hard. We get them involved in donations. Every year we talk about donations, we get them involved. We do a lot of volunteering. We're starting to do more philanthropy. So we get them involved in a lot of things. We travel to places where people are less privileged than us. So they recognize that they are lucky to have things. And when something seems like it's a big deal to them, it's actually a first world problem. We talk about these things a lot. Sometimes we joke that we should give them artificial problems. We should say, oh, you need a computer for school? Too bad. We can't do it. We think about these things because certain things, I want them to sort of feel a little bit of struggle. I want them to feel like they can't have everything they want whenever they want it. But it's funny because we love to travel, and that's sort of the big spend that we make in our house. And sometimes my kids will say things like, I love cheese, but you know where they have the best cheese? France. You can't talk like that. Or my husband travels a lot for work, and so he gets to skip all the lines at the airport. They were really little when they did this, but one day we're waiting in the back of the line because we were in a different country, a different airport. He didn't get to cross the lines. And they're like, we have to wait in line. And I'm like, okay, we have to have this conversation.
These are modern day challenges of financial parenting. It's great that you and your husband are on the same page and you're thinking through this. Rishma, tell us more about your decision-making work and how that comes into play with how you utilize money for yourself.
After my clinical practice, like I said, I helped people make very complex decisions. And what I realized about decisions is there's three things that most people don't talk about when it comes to decisions. One is the emotion involved. One is the trade or the sacrifice that we have to give in order to get something else. And the other one is the patterns. Money is one example, but it could be other kinds of patterns of history, experience, expectations, beliefs, these kinds of things. When I left my practice, this was one question that I used to get a lot is, why did you leave your practice? And most people I think would answer, oh, I hated my job or I was burnt out. But I loved my job. And I think this is why it's confusing for people. After 20 years, I was successful. I had a busy practice. Why would I leave this practice? And what I tell people is there's two answers. One is the straightforward answer, which is I was ready for something different. And the other one is the messy answer, which is there's so much more involved in terms of emotion, in terms of wanting to be around for my family, wanting to take care of my own health, wanting to try new creative things, wanting to learn and grow where I felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again. And when I left, this whole conversation we started with that you were talking about with your friend, the money thing, I think I knew that was going to be an issue. I knew that I was used to making a certain amount of money. And then I left my job and I was not making that amount of money anymore. And I knew that that was going to be an issue. So I sort of internally planned for it. It was a decision that I knew I was making with this trade in mind, recognizing I was doing it, recognizing I was building something new, and that it might take some time for me to get to a place where I was earning what I felt like I would like to earn in this new career. So it felt like a transition. But the things that I didn't anticipate were the identity pieces. I used to be able to walk into a room and say, oh, I'm Dr. Walji, and this is what I focus on. I have a fertility practice, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm like, oh, I'm Rishma. I'm doing some creative stuff. I don't know. And so inside my own life, I knew it was the right decision for me because I didn't take it lightly. I had done a lot of my own personal work to make sure that this was the thing that I wanted. But what I call the outside problem, when you go out in front of other people and you have to introduce yourself and then they wonder, oh, you can afford to do that? Or they say things.
Judgments again.
Yes, it's a very tricky place to be. So that took a lot of maneuvering and navigating. I was already interested in decision making, but that one experience of leaving the job and now working on this work, writing this book, all of my things that I'm doing related to this, it's sort of representative of what I went through in that time.
So when you make decisions about money for yourself today, what goes through your mind? What are some of those emotions? How are you making those decisions when it's just about you and not family?
Oh, if it's just about me, that's very different. I can make the decisions easier when it's about my kids. Many of us are that way. We can spend for other people, but less so for ourselves. I think for me, when it's time to spend on me, I ask myself, is this something that I really want and why? Or is this something that I think I value? Let's say that I value it because sometimes it's not necessarily that I need it or I don't want to ask myself if I deserve it. I don't like putting those expectations or limitations. I do ask myself, is this something that I value? Because we always get information from other people about what they value, social media and internet and marketing and all of these things. And so you sort of get into these traps, and I do too. I'm human. You'll see something that someone has, like a purse or something. You're like, oh, it's so pretty. But actually, is it something that I value? So that's a question that I ask myself over and over and over. Is this something I value? And that's usually how I make my decisions. That's sort of the base. The value, I think, is something that's really important because I know what kind of life I want to live. I know what kind of person I want to be. I have a very clear vision of the kind of future I want to live. And I see my parents aging now, and they worked really, really hard. And now they don't have their health and they don't have the ability to sort of drag a suitcase around. I don't want to end up at this place where I can't enjoy the things that I've worked hard to get. So I try to think about the value.
I love this idea of helping people with intentional decision making and that it's complex. And I wonder if you can share a framework as people have their complex decisions they need to make, a framework they can leverage to come to a better decision or make a more intentional decision. I think that's sort of the goal.
For sure. The reason I use the word intentional is because 90% of our decisions are made subconsciously. And so if anyone is in marketing, you know that we make emotional decisions because of...
I'm in marketing. We sure do.
Yeah, status or a lot of consumer marketing is based on the subconscious belief of things that people want for whatever reason. So I use that word intentional because when we make those decisions, especially life decisions, money, of course, is important. And then there's also life decisions, family. Should I move? Should I stay home with my kids? Should I go back to work? These are very complex decisions. And when we make them intentionally, we're making them based on not what we think we should have, not what we think we should want, but what actually works for us in our life. In my whole framework, the first thing is vision. You have to know not just what you want in terms of goals, not what you think you should want, but who do you want to be? And the reason I think this is so important is because if you don't know what you want, you'll end up chasing a dream that isn't yours. This is why I talk about it, because especially for women, when we put other people ahead of ourselves, I know exactly what my kids want. I know exactly what they need. I don't always pay attention to that for myself. And so I spend a lot of time with people figuring out, okay, what is your vision? How do we figure out not just what you want for your life, but who you want to be as a person, how you want to feel? And that I think is the key for balancing life. When I think about my own vision before, I used to think, okay, I want to have financial security, I want to have independence. But when I add all of the other pieces of vision of who do I want to be healthy. I want to be mentally sound. I want to be happy. And that's when I had to add the lifestyle pieces in there. Then it wasn't just about money. It was also about my time with my friends and time with my family.
What does it mean to be happy? Going the layer deeper.
Exactly. So that vision piece encompasses a lot. And then I usually get into a couple of more pieces. One is untangling the emotions, because of course there's many emotions in all of these decisions.
So hard to untangle, even to identify.
Identifying is actually even harder sometimes. But if we don't untangle them, then we're going to end up getting caught up in life. Oh, I should do this. This is the next thing. This is the next thing. And then we can't actually unpack the decisions that we want. And that's when I see people have regret and resentment and pain, even in relationships. You asked about how my husband and I talk. A lot of times people will have this resentment and pain because they haven't unpacked all of the emotions. So there are moments with my husband and I where I'll say, I'm starting this new career and I don't know if I'm successful because I used to think of success as money. And now I'm thinking of success in a different way, legacy, role model for my kids. I'm thinking of success in different metrics, but I'm trained to think of it as money. And so we'll have conversations, very vulnerable conversations, and we'll have to talk about this. Same thing for him in different ways. He has different ideas about, I have to work, I'm not able to take time off, or whatever his thing is. And we will talk about those things. So untangling the emotions is really, really important. On the other side of that, we have to take into account context. The advice for me is going to be different than the advice for you. Good advice can become bad advice if it's out of context. So my situation, because I have 2 teenagers and my parents are aging and my in-laws have health issues, this is going to be a very different context than for somebody else. So making those decisions in context, not in a vacuum. And then the last thing is patterns, which is, I think, up your alley with money stories and things like that.
You got to be careful of those patterns. But it's amazing once you become aware of them, you can really control them and use them to work for you instead of against you. Rishma, tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be and who's it going to be with?
I mentioned that I'm very open with my kids. I hope we have taught them enough about budgeting and saving and donating, but we haven't talked a lot about investing. So they're teenagers now. They're going to be moving out soon and doing their own thing. And I think that it's a good time. They've started learning in math about compounding interest, things like that. I think we're going to start talking to them about investing and starting to expose them to that world.
It's incredible. You have wonderful conversations. I think investing sounds like the right next one with them. Where's the best place for our listeners to find you?
My website's probably the best place, livingxo.com.
Wonderful. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you on Money Tales.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspiriant. Go to aspiriant.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@aspiriant.com. See you next time.